The Triple Entente was the name of the alliance of France, Britain, and Russia in the early 1900s. This alliance also united several countries, including Portugal, Japan, the United States, Brazil, Canada, and Spain through their connections with the main countries involved. This alliance would eventually be known as the Allied Powers once the Great War began. The Triple Alliance was the name of the military alliance between Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy that lasted from 1882 to 1914. Each country promised mutual support should one of them be attacked by another world power. This group was to be known as the Central Powers during the Great War, although secret agreements would see Italy out of the alliance. On the 28th of June 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria was traveling through the city of Sarajevo in the Austrian province of Bosnia. However, while the driver of their car was correcting a wrong turn, Gavrilo Princip, an assassin from a shadowy group known as the Black Hand, spotted Franz and his wife Sophie and shot and killed them both. The assassination caused Austria-Hungary to seek vengeance on Serbia, Princip's homeland, and sparked the Great War. A month after Franz's death, Austria-Hungary officially declared war on Serbia. The next day, Russia began to mobilize for war to defend its Serbian allies. The day after that, Germany began to mobilize in order to defend Austria-Hungary, but officially declared war on Russia on August 1st. That same day, France began their mobilization to support Russia, and also in the hopes of getting revenge upon Germany for the loss of the region of Alsace-Lorraine during an earlier war. The United Kingdom joined the rapidly growing war on August 4th after Germany ignored its request to keep the country of Belgium neutral. Once the war got heated, Italy dropped out in favor of the Allies due to secret treaties it had, but Germany had made a secret treaty with the Ottoman Empire and brought them into the war in Italy's stead. Much later, in 1917, the United States joined the war, late but still helpful. Once the war began in 1914, Germany enacted a plan to attempt to ensure its victory. Composed by Count Alfred von Schlieffen, the plan was to sweep through neutral countries of Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands in order to quickly attack France and attain a decisive victory there. After stopping France, Germany was to swing back east to defeat Russia. The plan would allow Germany to prevent itself from having two fronts to fight on in order to prevent their military from being split and weakened. In addition to striking quickly with the Schlieffen Plan, Germany needed a way to keep the naval might of Great Britain out of their way. They attempted to do so by using the newly invented submarine to sink British ships while remaining underwater and undetected. They also sought to make Britain back out of the war by sinking merchant ships bound for Britain so that their trade would be ruined and they would lose the will to fight. However, after this sub-warfare stopped being precise and began to attack any ships near their positions, Germany managed to anger the US and several other countries and aided in bringing the US into the war for the Allies, leading them to cease their sub-usage. New technologies made the battlefields of the Great War more dangerous than ever. Chemical warfare was introduced, with such concoctions as mustard gas being used to injure, impair, and even kill enemy soldiers. The invention of the airplane gave armies a new scouting tool, along with later weaponizing them with machine guns. The machine guns themselves had seen an upgrade, no longer being the hand-cranked, bulky, and slow weapons of old, and instead were now fast-firing emplacements of death manned by small 2 or 3 man groups or mounted on planes and zeppelins for air combat and air-to-ground attacks. Fought between the 5th and 12th of September 1914, the First Battle of the Marne was fought near the borders of France. As the German army marched towards the city of Paris, they broke up into 2 sections, a mistake which the Allies noticed and capitalized upon. Allied forces poured into the gap and attacked the German groups on both sides. Both sides received heavy losses, but in the end the German forces were nearly destroyed and were forced into retreat. The Germans ceased their retreat some miles away from the Marne and dug in to prepare for the coming of the Allies, who similarly dug in once they arrived and saw the German fortifications. This began the long process of trench warfare on the French front of the war. Fought over the strategic town of Ypres in West Belgium, the Battle of Ypres lasted through October and November of 1914. After the First Battle of the Marne led to forces being dug in, each side rose northward while trying to maneuver around enemy lines. The Battle for Ypres showcased a weakness in the leadership of both sides, as neither side was truly able to gain a decisive advantage over the other. The Allies eventually were considered to have won, but only after heavy losses. After the battle, both sides continued the trenches that had been creeping north and effectively finished drawing the trench lines that would become known as the Western Front. On Christmas of 1914, many parts of the war front came to an unofficial ceasefire. Troops rose out of their trenches on both sides and headed into the no man's land, where they mingled peacefully, exchanging food and souvenirs, conducting burial ceremonies for the dead, and even some Christmas caroling. Not all of the fighting forces got such a reprieve, but the act was still seen as a symbol of peace and humanity in such dark times. However, in the years to come, such truces would cease after stern orders against such truces came, several bloody battles, and the introduction of chemical warfare caused both sides' mutual hate to grow to unbearable levels. In 1915, a British passenger ship called the RMS Lusitania was returning to Great Britain when it was identified by a German submarine and fired upon. The ship was severely damaged and sunk only 5 minutes later, killing 1,198 of the passengers on board, leaving only 764 survivors. The attack on a passenger ship by the Germans led to much of the world's public to turn against them, and the fact that there were U.S. citizens aboard was a main cause of the U.S. joining the war on the side of the Allies. The hate generated from the attack was so overwhelming that around 1916 the Germans ceased their unrestricted sub-warfare. Fought for 10 months from February to December 1916, the Battle of Verdun was one of the bloodiest battles of the Great War, and overall one of the bloodiest in all of history, with 698,000 deaths counted total. A largely artillery battle, it was started by the Germans with an intent to force the French and Allied forces into a position they could not retreat from, and then inflict heavy casualties. The fortress city of Verdun was chosen as the point of attack, having had its defenses weakened by the years of war. In the end, however, both sides took about equal losses, and though the French were considered to have won, no real ground was gained by either side, continuing the locked trench warfare. Through the 1st of July to the 18th of November in 1916, the Allies attempted to reclaim the region of Somme in France. This battle was to serve to reveal Britain's newest tool of war, the tank. After the infantry managed to fight their way almost 6 miles into enemy territory, tanks were used to try to capture the rest of the region. Intended to break the stalemate of trench warfare, technical difficulties rendered the tanks nowhere near as useful as expected, and in the end only 1 more mile was gained by them. While not a real victory for either side, as both took very heavy losses, it still granted many benefits to the Allies, and also caused Germany to finally accept Britain's armies as an actual threat instead of only fearing their navy. While the sinking of the RMS Lusitania was a major factor in bringing the U.S. into the war, the other factor that had a large impact was the Zimmermann Note. In 1917, a telegram was sent from Germany to Mexico, routed through Galveston, Texas, where it was intercepted and decoded by the U.S. The note was an offer from Germany to Mexico of support should Mexico assist Germany by attacking the U.S. should it join the war on the side of the Allies, and it promised Mexico it would gain back the lands of Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona should it comply. The public outrage at this note contributed to the overall causes of the U.S. joining the war, despite Mexico remaining neutral. On March 3, 1918, Russia and Germany signed a peace treaty at the city of Brest-Litovsk and officially brought Russia out of the Great War. After the success of the October Revolution in Russia, the new Soviet government sought peace with Germany so that it could focus on strengthening itself. Negotiations began in late December 1917. However, secret actions by Germany had angered the Soviet leaders, who backed out of the negotiations. However, after doing so, the Germans seized control of many Russian lands such as the areas of Ukraine, Belarus, and the Baltics, and even proceeded close to the Russian capital of Petrograd. When the Germans sent a new treaty to the Soviet leaders, they grudgingly accepted the new harsher terms and left the war. The last major offensive of the Western Front by the Germans, the Second Battle of the Marne, was an attempt for the Germans to make a decisive attack on Allied forces and end the trench lock of the front. Starting on the 15th of July 1918, the Germans proceeded forward and crossed the Marne River, but were later pushed back across it. Then the Allies counterattacked, putting into play a plan they had been working on for months, and pushed back the Germans to where they had begun their spring offensives of 1918. The Allies suffered heavy losses, but emerged the victors on the 6th of August, with the battle marking the end of Germany's winning streak and the beginning of a series of Allied victories. After the long chain of defeats that began at the Second Battle of the Marne, Germany was becoming discontent with the war and sought the removal of the Kaiser. While he was at the military headquarters in Spa, Belgium, Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany faced uprisings in Berlin and mutinies of his forces, most notably his beloved Imperial Navy, shocking him deeply. After the German Revolution of 1918, his power was taken from him, with Chancellor Prince Max of Baden announcing his resignation as king of both Germany and Prussia for him, and he was forced to sign his abdication. He then took a train to the Netherlands, where he remained in exile for the rest of his life while the new Republic leaders ran the country. On the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month of 1918, Germany signed the armistice that ended the Great War with a German defeat. Signed on a train in the French forest of Compiègne, the Germans signed expecting the peace that U.S. President Woodrow Wilson was seeking with his 14 points. However, the terms made by the French were different from the 14 points, but still succeeded in ending the war and bringing peace to Europe. After the war was ended, the Allies and Central Powers gathered in Paris to discuss what would happen to the Central Powers as punishment for their loss in the war. The treaties sought to redo many country borders and were to impose harsh economic penalties on Germany, despite Woodrow Wilson's pushing for his more peaceful 14 points. For 6 months of 1919, Paris acted as the center of world government until the Treaty of Versailles fully ended the war. The Paris Conference also marked the creation of the League of Nations, an organization of countries dedicated to world peace. Before and throughout the Paris Conference, and all the way up to the final Treaty of Versailles, Woodrow Wilson argued for his 14 points of peace to be used in dealing with the Central Powers. Wilson sought open, not secret treaties between the countries, freedom of the seas, removal of economic trade barriers, the reduction of military armaments, and just treatment for colonies. He also advocated the evacuation and self-determination of Russia, Belgium, Austria-Hungary, the Balkan countries, Turkey, and the New Poland, the readjustment of Italy's borders, and the founding of the League of Nations. Some of Wilson's points were put in effect in the Treaty of Versailles, but most were ignored in favor of harsh vengeance upon the Central Powers. On the 28th of June 1919, the Treaty of Versailles was signed in France and officially fully ended the state of war between the Allies and the Central Powers. After 6 months of argument at the Paris Peace Conference, the Treaty of Versailles was created. The treaty forced Germany to accept the blame for the war and made them pay large reparations to the Allies, forced a general disarmament upon them, and took large portions of land away. These harsh conditions were signed grudgingly by Germany and did not fully succeed in their goal of weakening Germany while leaving it complacent. The anger at the harsh terms would serve to cause Germany to instigate many later conflicts and eventually set the world on fire again with World War II, but for now peace had been gained at last. In the end, though, the war was started by causes that had been there for years. European countries' aggressive militarism, complicated alliance systems that brought many people into a war who never wanted it, the intense focus on imperialism and gaining vast amounts of wealth and power, and the fervent nationalism that made it hard for any countries to work together peacefully with each other all led up to the Great War. Even after the war ended, however, these things remained, which would eventually lead to the sequel of the Great War.